Hello and welcome to our live stream. Been a while actually. It seems like quite a while since we did a live stream. I think we missed basically a week, which was the week in the build up to the Dutch Grand Prix when I was quite busy at the beginning of that week in London for the opening of the Formula One exhibition, which was big success. Amazing number of people. If you haven't been there and you're based in England, get along to, or the UK, shall we say, sorry about that, or even in Europe, get along to the exhibition. It's never looked better than in the London Arena, now known as the XL Arena. It looks fabulous. We've got lots of space this time, or more space than ever before, let's phrase it that way. And just some wonderful atmosphere, great exhibits. And of course, because it is based in the UK now, which is a little bit of the hub of Formula One, let's face it, we've got a change of emphasis reflecting that, and I think you'll enjoy that. I hope you will. Lots of support from obviously from F1 but from many of the teams as well. Big thank you to all of those, and for all those that have been so generous in lending us not merchandise, but artifacts and other wonderful things, from helmets to overalls to tiny little things, that perhaps letters that you would never have known existed until they surfaced, and now under lights they look wonderful in this Formula One exhibition. So that was what I was doing at the beginning of the week, and stayed over for the on the Friday I was at the Silverstone revival, which was, I must say, I really enjoyed it. I've done many Goodwoods, but the nice thing about Silverstone is there's of course much more space, and there's a different atmosphere because it's not so, I don't know, what should I say? It's just easier to do everything at Silverstone. You just get around, look at all the cars without too much sweat. I was there with Jack, and we just had a great day, really good day, looking at all different, spending as much time in the car park actually as we did in the paddock areas, and out watching all the cars on track, just going through the car park looking at wonderful vehicles, and that was a great day as well. And then we had the Dutch Grand Prix, and now here we are on the Wednesday after the Dutch Grand Prix, or is it the Wednesday before the Italian Grand Prix? Losing track already. No, it is both, of course. So good to be with us, and thanks for joining us if you are. The live stream is a pretty simple format. It's basically just go to the YouTube chat and ask questions, and I'll try and get through all of them. I try and do it in chronological order, which is probably not the correct way of doing it, but it seems the logical and fair way from where I sit anyway. And I try to put your question up on the screen and we go from there. So with no more ado, let's try to do that. Let's see if we can make that happen with the magic of modern technology. Let's get that going. Where are we? Browser, there we go. Bring that up. There we go. First question. I always see these questions blind as well, because I'm usually flat out on a million things, and I come into them thinking, oh, Windsor, you should have done a bit of research on this. So apologies if I don't actually have an explanation or comment to make about all of your questions. You usually have me on my toes, that's for sure. But this is from Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. Vettel asked Michael Schumacher in '09 how to attack Suzuka. Did he? Wow, you know more than me, more than I about it. Let me move my camera a little bit. Now I've got all the logos there. I'm seeing myself. Okay, it's a bit more centered, isn't it? Like which lines to take, etc. Michael responded, I don't know. I just try to go fast from turn 1 to 7 and not bother about lines. Simple explanation. Well, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Michael would say that, because he never really liked to talk very much in detail about his driving. And that's partly because it's a little bit like Lewis, a little bit like Jim Clark, a little bit like, I wouldn't say Jackie Stewart, because he was very explicit about his driving, but let's think of another good example. Alan Prost, yeah, be another good example of these guys who have the feel and the touch, Nigel Mansell too, to elongate the straights, to make the corners a little bit shorter, turn in on the brakes. All of those things are not easily describable, or indeed actually in the forefront of their mind when people ask them how to drive around Suzuka. They immediately turn to things like lines and breaking points and stuff if they are going to try and give some advice, which isn't really what their lap is all about. It just sort of, I wouldn't say that was the easy answer, but it's the logical thing for most racing drivers to do. So if you ask Nigel Mansell today to describe a lap of Brands Hatch, he would talk about, well, you brake here and you turn into paddock bend there and you do this, but he would never say oh yeah, but you got to, this is a corner where you can really get in on the brakes and you can really get a transition at a completely different point to most people, very slow speed transition, but the unbelievable exit you get if you get it right is just magnificent, or whatever. He would never say that any more than Michael did. I pushed Michael quite a lot to describe the way he drove, and he never really responded to any of it. He never really responded to anything. And I hope it wasn't just me. I don't think it was, because he saw any sort of interview as a sort of a battle that he had to win, and the fewer words he had to let loose from his mouth, the more he had won the battle. That was his sort of competition for the afternoon. And then going back to Vettel, he was always unbelievably good at Suzuka, and no surprise there really. He was always, let me recant that. He was always unbelievably good at Suzuka when he had a great back end on the car, and I include the Sauber BMW at that point, because he was doing a lot of Fridays, or he did a Friday for them there, and I remember he was just brilliant to watch through the Degners where I was watching. But bear in mind, as I've always said, he's unbelievably good at what he does, which is he's a V driver extraordinaire, but he does need, because he doesn't have the same level of touch as Max or Lewis or Charles or Sterling Moss or Jim Clark or Michael, the same level of touch to manipulate the car. If he doesn't have a great back end, he doesn't have that level of touch. And so when the great back end went away, then he wasn't quite as good as he had been. In fact, he was half a second slower, I think, than Ricciardo at Red Bull when they were together in that last year around Suzuka, the circuit where Seb always looked really good. And that's because I think, so when he did have a great back end, he was unbelievably good around Suzuka. It was almost if that circuit was tailor-made for him, because if you think about it, turn 1A, 1B, which is the increasing radius downhill plunge into that first corner at the beginning of the S's, that is all about V. It's all about just going in at a straight line, and then you just get on the anchors, rotate the car for 1B, job done. And because he was so good at rotating the car with a back end, with a good back end, he would usually come out of 1B a little bit left of center rather than using all the road on exit, which put him in a perfect position for the beginning of the S's, turn 1 of the S's. And if you're in a perfect position for the entry to the S's, you can basically keep that line then all the way up through to the top of the hill without really being a front end driver, rear end driver, a short corner driver, an oversteer driver, or whatever. Once you've got that thread, it takes you away to the top of the hill. That is the beauty of the S's at Suzuka, in my opinion, including the last bit at the top of the S's when you want to be in really good position for Dunlop, the left-hander. And Seb was always middle of the road at the top of the S's there, which is a great position to be going into Dunlop. And then he was fabulous. Degner was, again, that was a classic Seb V section of road. He could just go into the first corner, a little bit of oversteer, just to counteract the natural understeer you get into Degner 1, and then let the car settle, and then he was just great on exit there. Hairpin again, that's a classic Seb corner out of there. Spoon, another classic Seb corner. They were just built for him. Then 130R was what it was then, as it is now. And then there was the chicane, and the only thing at the chicane is that it's a weird corner because you're approaching it slightly from uphill going down with not a lot of reference point on the outside. And the only real issue you can have at Seb's level of performance going into the chicane is that you might be tempted after a good lap to brake a tad early into that to leave a bit of margin, and he never really had that problem either as far as I can see. So bang, there Bob's your uncle. He was always really good around Suzuka. And it doesn't surprise me that Michael didn't need to tell him how to do that, because Michael, as I say, was never going to be detailed enough to describe how he drove the laps of Suzuka, which was slightly different in the sense that if he didn't have a great back end, he could still make use of it. And if he'd started to explain to Seb how to do that, I think it would have all got tangled up in glockenspiels or something like that. Anyway, very good question, and interesting to reflect back to those times and how good Seb was around Suzuka. One of the great circuits, you got to say. So in that sense, that's one of the reasons he was, many people see him as such a great driver, which of course he was. I'm just going to reshuffle now a little bit the what I'm looking at here on screen. Okay, next one is It's the same one from Sir Ross Shulman. Try and keep it down to 2, shall we? Don't even, because I don't really mind if somebody asks 50 questions, but I want everybody to feel that they get a reasonable crack on this show. It's a show after all, you know. So, you know, try and keep it to 2, and then everybody might have a chance of having their question read. So, Ross, hi Peter. Thought that Leclerc was brilliant in Netherlands, Dutch Grand Prix, precise, good in tyre management, brilliant in defence. I'd say this is one of his best races this year. Oh yeah, absolutely. I did say that at the time. Superb drive by Charles Leclerc. Absolutely spot on. In a car that wasn't still that good, and certainly had to think about time management as well as all the other stuff. As you say, the defence, and generally being quick enough to make sure that Oscar Piastri, who at the end of the day was in a McLaren-Mercedes, a very good car, didn't beat him. And Piastri's, you know, aggressive enough as you know, he's an aggressive racing driver, and to beat Piastri, I thought was a superb performance. His best races, I don't know, you know, Monaco wasn't bad, was it? But yeah, certainly be right up there with Monaco. And yeah, good to see Charles putting in that drive. And I thought, and don't forget Carlos Sainz, how well he drove from where he was, and how well he drove to beat Sergio Perez. You know, he got past a Red Bull, and that was impressive, I thought. Ant C. Hello, asked this question last time. Can you talk about the circumstances surrounding the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix? Well, this is a good example. See, I didn't get to that question, so my apologies, and thank you very much indeed for asking it again. Seem weird to say the least. Regards, Maldonado's win, Frank's birthday, and a fire in the pits. I don't think it was Frank's birthday, was it? Frank was, I think that race wasn't it in May, mid-May or something like that? Frank's birthday was quite near mine, which means mid-April, as it was quite near Carlos Reutemann's, Riccardo Patresi's, and Ross Cheever's. So, yeah, I don't think it was his birthday, but certainly the race was amazing, wasn't it? Because not only did Pastor win that race, he was on the pole as well. I don't know how many people remember that, but he was on the pole for Williams. And my recollection of that qualifying session is actually, I was really, you know, I knew Pastor pretty well, actually. He did quite a lot of stuff with Rob Wilson, and he was just a good bloke. I liked him, and I rated him very highly. I actually did a lap of Silverstone with him in a Radical or something weird like that. And yeah, you know, short corners, really good. Bit, you know, not very consistent. And we all know that he had his, you know, golden moment in Barcelona. But there were other times when he was super quick as well. And particularly GP2, he was amazing. And I always rated him and felt that, I remember going to the British, I'm going all over the place. I remember going to the British Grand Prix that year, and I was doing some work with one of the big sponsors down at Beckett's. And I remember one of the Sky commentators was there, and Maldonado came into view, and he said, "Oh, here's Maldonado, wait for the crash, wait for this." It was just completely and utterly critical of him, and there was nothing positive to say about him. And I just thought, you know, so easy to be critical outside the box. This guy won the Spanish Grand Prix pretty comprehensively. I mean, he beat Fernando on Fernando's home soil, Fernando in a Ferrari for Pete's sake, and he just beat him under pressure. I mean, if I think about that race in the context of history, I suppose, it was year 2 of the Pirelli monopoly. So in those days, time management was even more of a big deal than it was then, than it is now, sorry. So a lot of that race was time management and when to push and when to pull. And because Pastor was on the pole, and because he made a good start, and because he was in front, he was able to kind of dictate what was going on. I think Fernando had traffic was more of an issue in those days as well. Say those days, it wasn't that long ago, was it? But it was, I suppose, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, 10 years ago. 12 years ago. Traffic was more of an issue then, and you could lose a lot of time in traffic. Today, it's unusual to lose. Yeah, if you're impeded, everybody knows about it, and the guy gets a penalty. But back then, it wasn't policed as well. And I think Fernando got held up quite badly early in the race. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was one of the Mauritia drivers, maybe. Was it maybe Charles? What's he called? Charles Pic, I think it was. Yeah, I think he was involved somehow with Fernando. Rings a distant bell, and there was that. But I don't think that was a real reason for Fernando getting beaten. Everybody just thought that Pastor would make a mistake in the last 10 laps, and inevitably Fernando would win the Spanish Grand Prix. And he never did. He just stayed on it 100%. And just, I was saying earlier, I was going back to qualifying. I was actually also very close to Bruno Senna that year because he was doing days with Rob and he was getting better and better all the time. And I remember he did a lot of work on the build up to the Spanish Grand Prix. And I remember being unbelievably, disappointed, upset, angry. I'm not angry with Bruno, obviously not. Well, how could I be? But I was just angry with the situation that I remember in Q1, he was really quick in the first 2 sectors. And then he came out of turn 9 and he was easily going into into Q2. And he'd had an issue, I think, on the first lap. And then he just braked too late, fraction too late into the tight left at the end of the straight and then ran wide. And then he didn't get out of Q1. And I remember thinking at the time, that's really unfortunate because Bruno would have been really quick this weekend had he got through into Q2. I remember that. And then I remember, obviously, Pastor winning. And then, that fire afterwards, what was about an hour and a half after the race, I think, there was a massive fire in the Williams garage, of all garages, having won the race. And it was, it was very worrying. Frank in the wheelchair, and there were heroes that day, going into the fire, getting people out, making sure that everyone was safe, and they were in the end, amazingly. I think it was sparked by something to do with the ERS. But there was fuel being decanted at the time, I think, on the Senna car. And Matteo Bonciani, who was the FIA media delegate at the time, in other words, in charge of the press office, was one of the guys that I actually voted for at the end of the year in the FIA thing as Man of the Year, I think, or Personality of the Year for the work he did under pressure there, getting people out of that Williams garage, covered in fire extinguisher and soot and everything else. And a lot of people did similar things, including from memory, Pastor himself. I think he was in there too. And I think he had a young cousin or something like that he got out as well. So yeah, just an amazing, unbelievable time really. We were all pretty spooked in those early years with the whole KERS thing. And everybody wearing the, very concerned, the red light, the green light, the rubber gloves, everything else, and still are today, but everybody kind of takes it for granted now. But back then it was a really big thing, getting used to all that. So there you go, that one. Just make sure I'm on the right page here. Okay, this is from Alonso Kus. Alonso Kus. Hi Peter, I grew up being a Senna fan. Yeah, no surprise there for those of that era. And since you have chatting about your recent rally experience, did you have any insider stories of Ayrton swapping to drive rally cars in '86? Well, that was amazing, wasn't it? That was my buddy Russell Bulgin who put that together with Cars and Car Conversions magazine. Not sure if it's still around now. It was a good magazine, actually, well written, and Russell was one of the best journalists that I ever knew in terms of his quality of his writing, the standard of his writing, and his knowledge and his enthusiasm. Just a wonderful writer all around. Sadly not with us, passed away at a young age, but he, like all of us, he knew Ayrton pretty well, and he got to know him in Formula 3, I think, and now here he was at Williams in '86, sorry, at Lotus in '86, and he was winning Grand Prix and looking pretty good, and Russell, through his Cars and Car Conversion, was pretty orientated towards car conversions and rallying, obviously hot rally cars. And Ayrton, I guess at some point, knowing Russell, he probably said to Ayrton, "No, you should come down to Wales or something. We'll organise it all. Come drive some rally cars." And you say something like that to Ayrton, and he was always going to say, "Absolutely, I'm there." You wouldn't phone up Peter War and ask for permission or anything like that. None of that nonsense, nanny nonsense. And so, I remember thinking, wow, I wish I'd been doing all that. I only knew about it when it came out in the magazine, but there he was, and he was driving, Fiestas and Escorts and Golfs, and impressively, the four-wheel drive Williams Metro that Patrick Head designed, the one and only rally car that Patrick Head designed, but what a great rally car it was. And Ayrton drove that as well. And it caught, everything in that you read about it at the time. And I remember speaking to Ayrton about it. He said, "Oh, yeah, I love it. But I have to focus on Formula One, the usual old thing." But everybody who was there said he was just magic and adapted straight away and loved it and got straight into the whole business of this. And leaving no margin at all. I think he hit a tree in one of the cars, not very heavily, of course. But yeah, it just shows, I keep making the point. I've fallen in love with rallying, WRC, as it is at the moment, and I keep making the point that, it's quite near Formula One, and I hope that came over in the video I did with Terry Neuville, flying with Neuville. And if you haven't seen that, please watch it, because it's one of the highlights of my life career anyway, just doing that with Thierry, and what was almost a competition atmosphere in terms of the kit and everything we had, and the stage we were on. And there is a lot of overlap. If you think about, or if I think about Carlos Reutemann, who I knew very well, of course, and how good he was in a rally car, and how much he learnt from rally drivers. Walter Roll particularly, he used to talk to a lot. And Nigel Mansell, how quickly he, a bit like Ayrton, he got into a rally car periodically, and he was immediately quick when he did the rally sprints. And yeah, there's a lot of synergy there, and I hope some of that, I was able to talk about that in a way that's logical in that video I did with Terry, because what Terry Neuville does with his left foot, we're now getting great views of what they do, and the way he's using the brakes and how much of the foot he actually puts on the brake when he's not actually braking at 100% is really revealing, I think. And it's just wonderful. I'm all psyched up to see what's going to happen in the Acropolis Rally. I guess it's kind of weird, the whole rallying world, because we get so used to all these rules that Bernie imposed, really. Every car must do every round, 2 cars only, same livery, blah, 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 all the stuff that came in 81, which we still live with. But in rallying, you come and go. The drivers can pick and choose the events they want. And 1 minute, Sébastien Ogier is saying, I'm going to do selected events in 2024. And now he's got half a chance to win the championship. And guess what? He'll probably do all the remaining rounds. But nobody knows until we actually see what happens in the next rally, what the entry list actually is. And they swap drivers around. It's quite good in a way. It kind of keeps you on your toes and where you're going and who's doing what. But yeah, it's a different feel to Formula One in that respect. Alonso Conscious asking another question here, which is, you always mention soft inputs with Norris. So Leclerc or Norris, who has the more subtle soft inputs of the two? Very, very similar. Very similar. I mean, Leclerc has Norris's inputs, but in addition has that feel for manipulation that I was talking earlier. This is my opinion, don't forget. It's not a textbook here, but it's my opinion, and I can only express my observations based on what I see, what I look at, and everything I've learned over the last 50 years in Formula One. Norris has, in my opinion, has Leclerc's softness of touch. But Leclerc, in addition, has that feel for wanting to extend the straights and both ends, going in and out of specific types of corners, and can create a slightly shorter corner than Lando Norris, who doesn't tend to be that interested in doing that. He just does what he does extremely well, and is in that mode 99% of the time. And I always said, he's soft, but I just wish he would go for a little bit shorter and really push his own ability and talent. He wouldn't do that now because he's found such a good rhythm and such a good sweet spot that why he would say, why would I need to do that? But there will come a time again when he's has a decent weekend, when Oscar Piastri is using slightly shorter corners on a circuit which rewards that. Zandvoort doesn't really anyway, as we saw with Lewis, as we saw with Oscar. And then that's the moment when Lando will need to be, again, thinking, what is Oscar doing that I'm not? But at the moment, that question, obviously, since Zandvoort, is not in his head. He's just thinking, wow, let's continue the way we are. So I would say Leclerc, I wouldn't say there is any difference in softness of touch and feel and manipulation and suppleness of movement, of rates of input. I think is what we're really talking about, the suppleness of the rates of input and the correct rate of input for whatever the dynamic of the car is at any specific millisecond. Lando is right there with Charles Leclerc, in my opinion. And I've felt that about Lando since he was in Formula 3, which is why I did so much stuff with him when he was in Formula 3. In the days when you're allowed to talk to Formula 3 drivers. Not today. Try and talk to a Formula 3 driver today. Oh no, very busy, sorry, can't do that. Or, what questions do you want to ask, or something like pathetic like that. Speaking of all that, I don't know if we're going to question on it. I'm really pleased to see Franco Colapinto getting a drive in the Williams towards the end of the year. On the one side of the coin, I'm very upset that Logan Sargent has basically been sacked. I'm sure it's a mutual thing in the end. You know, they had the shunt, but then again, you know, they didn't allow him to race in the Australian Grand Prix when it wasn't even his fault, and various other stuff. But he had the shunt. It's obviously cost the team quite a lot of money. But at the same time, he was paying for that drive, and at the same time, he is American, and we do have a US Grand Prix coming up. And as I said in the conversation I had with Cameron a bit earlier this week on Monday, it does reflect poorly on the management, the driver management at Williams, that they couldn't get the best from Logan Sargent, because he's definitely better than he's looked in that car, in my opinion. And he's shown that he has a lot of pace. And it's a great shame that Williams have just given up on that and torn up the contract, I guess, in effect, which I don't think is a good thing. And I know it's mutual, but it doesn't reflect well on their ability to get the best from a racing driver. Having said that, turning over the page, full marks to Williams for the opportunity they're giving Franco Colapinto, because this is a guy who, as far as I know, has never really had a proper racing budget at all, and he's done it through obviously getting results in the feeder formula from karting upwards, and then doing really good stuff in Argentina. He's Argentine Italian, I think, but basically Argentine, and he with the Automobile Club of Argentina, which is a huge thing. You know, that's the ACA, which used to sponsor Carlos Reutemann when he came over to do Formula 2, and Carlos Reusch and Benedicto Caldarella and all the other Formula 2 drivers of that era under Hector Staffer, the ACA designated team manager for that operation with the Brabhams. And now here we are, the ACA, doing this, helping Franco Colapinto a little bit, but mainly, I've got to say, it looks to me as if Williams are actually paying for him to drive and have helped him in Formula 2 as well. So on the one hand, I'm completely disheartened at the way they've mismanaged Logan Sargent. On the other hand, I think full marks to them for the opportunity they're giving Franco Colapinto. It's for the races, obviously, that Sargent can't do, because next year Carlos Sainz is going to be in that car. But to see a young guy who they obviously think has a lot of talent being given an opportunity when he doesn't really have the money, well, certainly doesn't have the money to buy one Formula One race, I think is amazing, actually. So there you go, 50-50 in my appraisal for Williams and what they're doing right now. And I think Colapinto looks to be very, very good. He drives well and he's got the right attitude. So I'd love to see him go well, and I think he will. He's managed by Jamie Campbell-Walter, who's a very good guy, good driver in his own right, very good guy all round. So he's in good hands, and maybe because of that, he'll go very well at Williams. I'm just not sure what went wrong with the Logan Sargent thing. I wish I knew, because at the moment it is in the hands of the team in the way they get the best from a driver, and you can handle that in a number of ways. And quite clearly, it hasn't worked with Logan Sargent at Williams, which is a shame. Because as I say, just to repeat myself, I think the guy is not slow at all. But obviously, he's under massive stress and isn't driving at all well. Anyway, thanks for that question. Good one. This is from Sujith. Hello, Peter. After what we've seen in Zandvoort, it seems as though McLaren need clean air to work. Will that hamper them in Monza with the DRS trains if they don't have pole? Interesting observation. That didn't occur to me at all. I think all the cars generally are much less efficient now in turbulent air than they were supposed to be at the beginning of the 2022 regulations, because of the way the regs have been changed a bit, and basically the aero is a bit more aggressive now, and there's more turbulence, and it is more difficult to follow a car in front. It hasn't struck me that the McLaren is a car that desperately needs clean air. I mean, Lando Norris didn't seem to have much trouble hanging on to Max Verstappen in the first 15 laps, did he? And then being in a really good position to pass him as soon as Max's tyres went off. I think that was more about driving. I think that was more about how well Charles Leclerc defended, and how Oscar couldn't do anything about it. That's how I see it. Maybe I'm too simplistic in the way I look at it, but to me, Charles positioned the Ferrari just perfectly in every opportunity place that Piastri had to get past. Charles was just covering him in the right way, and going a little bit slower in order to be a little bit quicker in other parts of the corner or the lap. Just beautiful to watch. So I I don't agree. It's not that I don't agree with that. I just don't think that's an issue. I think they're all about the same in dirty air. And when we get to Monza, it's a different situation because they're running low downforce setup. So the airflow from the car in front will be different by definition. Firstly. Secondly, just other points. It's the Pirelli soft tyre range, as it will be for the next 3 races actually, as soft as their compound range. And the track's been resurfaced, so fewer bumps. And who knows what effect that will have on tyre deg and tyre wear and temperature. And also some new curbs. Yet again, every year we have new curb designs at Monza, so nothing new under the sun there. So quite a lot of variables coming in that the teams need to play around with on a Friday. But I think you'll still see slipstreaming to be very important going into qualifying or in qualifying. It'd be difficult in Q1 probably with the amount of traffic. When you get to Q3 and you can probably have a bit of space and manage your cars well, I'll be shocked if you don't see the McLaren team trying to use probably Oscar to help Lando, I guess. That's what you would do, isn't it? Maybe they'll split it so it's even. I don't know. What first run it'll be Oscar, second run Lando, who knows? So, no way McLaren will ever do anything to help Lando with the championship. I know on Windsor you're being cynical, but those points from Hungary will come back into the story as the season develops. You wait. And I think you'll see them benefiting from toes, actually. Anyway, that's my forecast. Maybe wrong. Sujith, well, often wrong. Let's be honest. Sujith, and also, do you think same Sujith? 2 questions as well. And also, do you think weather in terms of wind was a factor in Ferrari having a terrible Saturday at Zandvoort? On Sunday, they had the best tyre life and made full use of the pace they had. Puzzling. Not really, no, I don't. Again, I mean, you're looking at a lot of interesting things there, Sujith. It sounds like you're an engineer. It reads like you're an engineer. Again, that didn't occur to me. I just think on Sunday, Charles Leclerc drove really, really well, and he got track position over Oscar, and then he made it impossible for Oscar to overtake him. And it wasn't that the car was magically much better. He just is a sort of driver that races really well, as is Carlos Sainz, and he did a very good job. And is the Ferrari worse in crosswind than a McLaren or a Red Bull? I don't think so. I don't think it is. I think it's... I mean, how would I know? How would anybody know that? I don't even know if Ferrari would know that. It's just an observation that you're making. Maybe you're right. Maybe. I find that surprising. I mean, Red Bull were talking a lot about the effect of the wind, of the crosswind as well. It's not so much crosswind, but also tailwind, headwind, what that was doing to the car in various corners, as were Mercedes. So I don't think if Ferrari were suffering on Saturday, I don't think it was because of their car is much worse in wind than the others. And conversely, I think you saw on Sunday both drivers doing a very good job of racing well. I mean, they're very good drivers, both of them. And who did they beat? Carlos beat Sergio Perez, who's not great in cross. I think that's a fair comment. He's not great in crosswindy conditions, and in the race there was still some of that, and he didn't do a very good job. He did okay, he did much better than he has of late, and it was a good sort of building block race for him, but it was very up and downy in terms of times, and he was pretty good at the end, wasn't he, on the hard tyre. And Charles Leclerc was just fired up being a racing driver and doing a very good job in a difficult car. That's the way I saw that. Interesting that you saw it slightly differently, and I totally respect your opinion on that, of course. Why wouldn't I? Okay, next one. Aaron Lee. Hey Peter, all tracks seem to be made of asphalt now, but in the past, were there any tracks which had significant sections of concrete? If so, were there any interesting comments from drivers about it? Well, that's an interesting question. My immediate reaction is Monza banking was concrete. Avis banking was concrete. So when we had banked circuits in Formula One, they were indeed made of concrete, the banking that is. And that's the reason the reason why in 1960 the British teams didn't go to Monza, the Italian Grand Prix at all, because the banking was so rough and bumpy that they just boycotted the race. and it always was. It was always unbelievably bumpy. Look at Grand Prix, the exhaust pipe coming off the car, and no, but I mean that wasn't completely and utterly stupid, because the car, there was just nothing but vibration on that concrete banking. I have no idea. It's obviously an engineering reason why they use concrete on the banking and not on the ground level. I guess it's because if it was tarmac, it would need too much underneath reinforcement and it would sag too easily, and concrete's much stiffer and therefore would just stay in place, and they could just build this sort of concrete thing that would last forever. But it was rough and bumpy, and so we did have it. And you had actually, I'm thinking about Arvis now, and I'm thinking about the Jean Bera accident in '59, which was in the wet, and he was in a Porsche Spider sports car, and he slid to the top of the banking and hit a pole and was killed. But actually, from memory, that was cobblestones, I think. Whether that was actually at that specific little point of the banking, or whether all the banking, I don't think all the banking was cobblestones at Avis. It may have been, but I don't think it was. But the big talk always was about the Monza banking and how bumpy and dangerous it was. And all the drivers after 60, it was last used in 61 for the Grand Prix when there was that horrendous accident. But that was nothing to do with the banking, actually. That was, Taffy Von Trips and Jim Clark touching wheels going into the Parabolica, and Taffy's car going off to the left into the crowd. But that year they did use the banking, and there were no incidents on the banking, but it was dangerous. It was the last time they used it. It was 56 was the year Musso. There were a massive number of tyre failures on the banking. I mean, I can't imagine what that was like. It's like do 10 laps flat out. There's a very good chance the left front is going to explode. I laugh. Musso was unbelievably quick that year, wasn't he? And eventually something broke for sure. So bring back the concrete? I don't think so. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But good question. I mean, where do these questions come from? It's amazing, isn't it? Everybody, they're probably thinking, Windsor, it's boring, all this normal stuff Windsor talks about. We'll put him on edge and ask him lots of stuff that he doesn't know anything about. Which I don't really, I don't know enough about the history of concrete in Formula One, I must say. This is Douglas. Hey, Peter. In his book, Newey describes Nigel as someone who bullied the car and Prost as someone who was very delicate. But you've described both as short corner drivers. Can you reconcile these? Well, yes. I can't reconcile anything Adrian said. I can certainly reconcile it in my mind that Nigel never bullied a car at all. And if Adrian used that word, it was completely inappropriate. What Nigel did, and which is what I think Adrian was getting at, was he would take a car to a limit that most racing drivers would blanch at, would walk away from. And that isn't just by sheer aggression of steering input and throttle and really aggressive use of all the controls. That was just sheer feel and commitment for what he knew the car could do. And you could sum that up by saying, well, he bullied the car into that. And Adrian, I think, would be the first to concede that Nigel was one of the most fingertippy, sensitive drivers he ever worked with. And if you didn't see that about Nigel, I'd be absolutely shocked, because that's the way Nigel drove. And Nigel was the epitome of a great short corner driver with enormous feel. But I hesitate to call it bravery. Nigel loves to call it bravery because, he loves Rambo movies. But for me, I always go back to this thing from Sterling Moss, that if to drive a racing car well, you should not need to be brave, because you need to be feeling what the car is going to be doing, and you've got to anticipate what it's going to do. And if you're letting the car surprise you and therefore relying on bravery to do something, a braking point or a turn-in point or whatever it is, then you shouldn't be in a racing car. That was Sterling's philosophy. And I've always thought that to be the case, actually, amongst all great racing drivers, even if they do talk about being brave. And I think that was the case. I think Nigel bullied the car in the sense that Riccardo Patrese wanted the car to go here, and Nigel would say, no, you're going to be here and I'm going to be doing that. That's, in that sense, he bullied the car. But when Nigel actually did that, he did it with enormous sensitivity and touch. Prost, I think, was of similar touch to Nigel, but I don't think he had that confident self-belief that he could live with the car in this sort of twilight zone into which Nigel often took it. I'm talking about a 14B, 14C now. And that's because Prost naturally, after a period of time, especially driving with Nicky and doing what he did with Nicky in that 84 championship and then 85, I think Prost always put a value on, not survival, it's the wrong word, of getting through the first corner unscathed and then bringing the car home, being his number one and number two priorities in life, and then getting the best from the car. He was super quick, there's no doubt about it, he was super quick. But I don't think Prost would have trodden on the areas where Nigel went in certain conditions. And we saw that when they were together at Ferrari, and we get to Silverstone, where Stowe and Club are basically flat, and Nigel's whatever he is, half a second quicker than Prost in qualifying. So that was it. And it's easy to be very smooth and sensitive if you're not ultimately on the absolute limit. Prost was still a great short corner driver, but he wasn't always on the ultimate limit. He was always, if he needed to, he could do it, but he would intelligently leave a bit of margin where he felt it was appropriate. Nigel would too, but Prost would think Nigel would have taken a lot more risk for sure if you asked him about it. And so every driver sees things through his own vision, and every engineer does, I guess, in terms of the feedback. I always remember Frank Durney coming back from the first test Nelson Piquet ever did in the Williams FW11 at Ricard at the end of, no, it's a 10B, sorry, at the end of 85, saying what a pleasure it was to work with a driver finally who stayed away from the curbs and just kept the car absolutely on rails. And wasn't Nelson brilliant? He was so smooth. But he was, slower than Nigel. What can you say? And he was slower than Nigel. End of story. So, engineers often have these sort of misconceptions of things. And I've often said, Nigel, a lot of people judge Nigel, the way he drove, by the strength of his handshake and the way he looked you in the eye and the way he was out of the car. And he was, he's a pretty rough and ready guy with a very, very strong handshake. And you could get the impression, that's how he drives a race car. But nothing could be further from the truth. Unbelievable touch. And I think Adrian has probably used the wrong adjective there, to be honest, with respect to Adrian. Right, let's go back. Oh, here's a Robin Cornelius. Thank you very much, Robin, for your super chat. Just trying to bring it up now. Okay, I've got to go up here to go. No, I think no. Here we go. Oof. Having difficulty actually bringing this up now on the screen. Dexter, what do you want? Going to have to look. Dexter, what do you want? Eh? What do you want? No, just wait for the live stream to be finished. I know Mummy's gone out, but you just have to wait. Sorry about that. I thought you'd like to see Dexter for a change. Come on, Dex, sit down, darling. Sit down. You'll be right. I speak to him like that because I was looking at a great rally. There's a great thing M Sport had just done on their team of drivers, Gregoire Munster and what's he called? Anyway, the other guy. And Gregoire Munster's got this great flat coat retriever, the big black retriever, and there's lots of pictures of him lying on the sofa with the flat retriever. Brilliant. Adrian Formeau, there you go. Cool guy, very fast driver, Adrian Formeau. Got a lot of respect for him. Anyway, where were we? Not quite sure where we were. I'm trying to. Oh, that's right. I'm trying to bring up this super chat. I mean, these poor people asked a super chat. Here I am clicking on the super chat. Absolutely nothing happening. Going all the way to the top now. Anyway, I'm going to read it out because I can't get it on screen. Hey Peter, saw an interview you did with Lewis Hamilton in 17. This is from Robin Cornelius. There you go, super chat. So an interview you did with Lewis in 17, if you remember, what stood out the most for you? Comments on Loic Serra joining SF. What changes might we be seeing? Talking to Lewis. Well, I've had many chats with Lewis over the years, and he's always just a funny guy, loves talking about racing, loves talking about driving, loves talking about Macau and things that he likes. You know, there's quite a lot of things we talk about that wouldn't be appropriate to talk about on air. Not because they're, you know, what you think, but because they are things that may be politically, well, Pirelli, for example, you know, he's talking about Pirelli sometimes. And I try to be nice to Pirelli for obvious reasons. And, you know, racing drivers, not Lewis, but racing drivers in general, like the tyres to be brilliant throughout the race distance, don't they? So we talk about that quite a lot. And anyway, I haven't spoken to Lewis for quite a long time, but I always had great conversations with him. So yeah, thank you for that. So Loic, I need to look up. What's he doing? Loic, Sarah, I've got to look at that one up. Ferrari. Don't know much about him, I'm afraid. I have to confess there, so I can't really offer an opinion about that one. But we'll ask around and see what the answer might be. Okay, next one. When did McLaren make Oscar number 2 until the championship is decided? It should have happened long ago. Well, on the basis that it didn't happen when Lando signed his long-term contract, because Lando never thought he would need to, I guess, and didn't push Zach into doing that. Will they do it now? I don't know. You know, after what we saw in Hungary, I mean, as I said at the time, you know, I would never make a critical comment of a team unless I'm just going to duck out for a second and see if I can get the exposure right again. It's very annoying how when I look at Dexter or something, the exposure, who's now lying on the floor, by the way, down there. Where is he? There he is. There's Dexter. Hello, Dex. The exposure display. No, I think I got it back now. Yeah, good. There you go. Touch of Dexter and we get the exposure back. Very good. You know, if I'd been involved in McLaren, had any sort of say, there's no way in the world I would have allowed the team to go into that race with the agreement they had. In other words, that if a driver had to cover for a competitor, not the other team driver, by covering him in the pit stop, and then happened to find himself in the lead, that he would then have to give that position back if he wasn't in the lead when it first happened. I would never have agreed to that because there are too many variables, and it's anyway part of racing, that covering. And if you know you're in the position, you bring that guy, the trailing driver, in, then you know that's part of racing. The only time I think you swap positions is if there's been if they're very, very close to one another and one of them's on fresher tyres or slightly different strategy. That's when you do it. But when you start playing with all those variables, I was absolutely astounded they did that. Now, a couple of engineers have rung me in a rage saying, Peter, you don't know what you're talking about. They did exactly the right thing. And maybe that is the way in 2024 many Formula One teams do operate. But it doesn't mean to say it's right. And I still think there was not enough value placed on the importance of a championship point, let alone a bundle of championship points. And they were taken away from Lando, who quite clearly, to anyone who has been watching Formula One for the last 2 or 3 years, if you're going to choose one McLaren driver with a chance to win the championship, it's going to be Lando Norris in 2024. I'm not saying for 25, but 24. And so McLaren are in that position, aren't they? I mean, I'm sure now, if they said to Oscar, from now on in, you're going to have to do exactly what we tell you. If we want you to give Lando a tow at Monza, if we want you to cede position to him, even if you're leading, you're going to have to do it. We gave you the win in Hungary. You know, probably everyone will say, oh, well, you know, absolutely right to do what they did in Hungary because now Oscar's being so compliant. Well, that, you know, that is an argument, but is Oscar actually going to give Lando all the points that who's to say that Lando wouldn't have won anyway, and anyway wouldn't beat Oscar? Point one, if they were racing, and two, are they going to make up the points they lost in Hungary anyway? So I still don't, you know, that argument doesn't carry a lot of water for me. Anyway, I agree with you. It should happen, and all the emphasis should be on Lando Norris. He does have a real chance of winning the Drivers' Championship. McLaren have obviously an even better chance of winning the Constructors' Championship, so that needs to be borne in mind. Not that really affects what they might do with tactics, but it might a little bit. So yeah, you know, it's a mess really with all that. And then you got Oscar Piastri, who, you know, thinks, well, I won Hungary, I nearly won the Belgian Grand Prix. I would have won it if I hadn't overstepped the pit stop probably. Had a bad weekend at Zandvoort, but if I'm in front at Monza, do I really want to not win the Italian Grand Prix? Good question. We'll see what happens. You give a guy a taste of victory and it's a bit like a shark with blood, isn't it? Bramwell, great drive from Leclerc in Zandvoort. He was in dirty air behind Piastri for so long, but the tyres held together. Looks like anything with a Mercedes engine is hard to pass, even with DRS. Well, yeah, except that, sorry, that didn't come through. Why is that? It's very annoying, this thing. Quite sure what to do about this. Why it's not coming up. Okay, I think it's up now. Yeah, well, of course, Leclerc's got a Ferrari engine, so it looks like anything with a Mercedes engine is very hard to pass. With, you mean? Yeah, I don't know. Again, you know, people are talking about the win, they're talking about following another car, they're talking about Mercedes versus Ferrari power. I think Ferrari, Mercedes, Honda are very, very similar now. And possibly the Renault is still suffering. And we have, you know, Flavio there now, who's obviously going to try and get Alpine onto Mercedes engines for next year, or well, I don't know when, but probably for next year. And we have parity, I think, in the power unit. So I don't think it was that either. You know, some teams do more with the Mercedes engine than others, don't they? So it's very difficult for anyone on the outside to say the Mercedes engine is slightly less than the Ferrari or the Honda in certain revs. Very difficult. I mean, one thing, I did that analysis off the line, and there's no doubt Lando had slight wheel spin as he accelerated in first, whereas Max didn't with the Honda. And maybe that's an engine thing. Maybe it's a bit more peaky with the Mercedes in low revs. Say the torque is a bit more peaky, maybe. But you don't really see the Mercedes factory cars making terrible starts. In fact, George Russell made a good start at Zandvoort. So I think it's very easy to look at all these things, a bit sort of engineering 2024 style. You know, there's always a reason for everything. It can never be just sort of simple human performance. But often it is. You know, I think Charles Leclerc did a better job in defence than Oscar Piastri did in attack. And I think that Max Verstappen drove really well at the weekend in a car that was on a knife edge and which quite clearly was never going to beat a well-driven McLaren. And Lando Norris was absolutely superb in every dimension apart from the start. You know, sometimes it is as simple as that in terms of what use they're making of the equipment and technology they have. So, yeah, thanks. Kurt Borman. Hello, Kurt. Welcome back. Hi, Peter. I trust you're well. I wanted to know how do the drivers know how much to push during the race trim as not to eat the tyres as compared to qualifying when they're flat out? Well, they get a lot of info from the team, the garage. They can monitor temperatures. They can monitor what's happening to the front and rear axle, as Daniel often likes to refer to them, and they can make a lot of changes, you know, whether it be to the diff, the brake balance, all sorts of things, and they can just tell them to look after the left front, left rear, whatever it is. So yeah, there's a lot of management going on of the tires all the time, and it's more accurate and it's more controlled than it was back at Barcelona in 2012. You know, so things move on, and it's fairly. That's why you see guys like Yuki Tsunoda quite regularly finishing in the points now. I mean, he's obviously a quick driver and he's consistently quick, but they are able to manage him really well from the garage in terms of what he's doing to all four corners of the car and how he looks after the tyres. So when we talk about tyre management these days, a lot of the credit should also go to the engineers and the garage and what they're doing with the driver there and how the driver responds to that, obviously. Another one from Kurt. Also, given that Ferrari have looked strong over the last couple of races, do you think they will go out and put the engine modes full up this weekend at Monza? I think they look good now. Well, I'm sure they'd be delighted to see your question, because I'm not sure they felt they went very well at Spa. They felt that they did a reasonable job at Zandvoort, but they still, by all accounts, got blown away by McLaren and Red Bull, didn't they? So they don't feel that they're going really well now. But of course, there will be a certain thought in the brain of how well they went at Monza last year, when they were, got to say, much quicker in a straight line relative to, say, Mercedes than they are this year. So I would say, without in any way wanting to be too much of a damp squib, that I'd be shocked if Ferrari are right at the front at Monza. I think Monza might bring everybody quite closely together in qualifying with slipstreaming and with one lap, but in the race I find it hard to see how Ferrari are going to be able to beat anything we saw differently from Zandvoort, a McLaren or a Red Bull. Maybe just one or maybe even two of those cars from those teams. It's difficult to imagine how Ferrari could... Well, I mean, having said all of that, this is the first time we've gone to a really, really fast circuit with full low downforce setup. So maybe a Ferrari in low downforce form isn't as slow in a straight line relative to its opposition as it is in medium or high downforce form. So that is a question that needs to be answered probably on the Friday, certainly on Saturday, of course. So yeah, there is that thought, but there's no reason on the back of Zandvoort to think that Ferrari are going to be mega quick. I think obviously they'll do all they can with the engines in qualifying. Why wouldn't they? This is Monza, and bottom line is, if they have to start sacrificing some engines back end of the year, taking some penalties, no big deal for them. It's not as if they're, in the running for the championship or anything like that. David B. Hi Peter, what do you miss most about Australia and what do you love about Spain? Well, thank you very much for that question. I won't spend too long on about it because I'm sure other people are not that interested in my personal life, if you like. But what do I miss most about Australia? The smell of a Sydney morning at 6 o'clock when you're walking through the park or down at the beach, the smell of the surf. That feeling of freshness that usually comes after overnight rain. And I used to experience that going to school. I used to have a long school trip, like a 90-minute trip to school every day, across Sydney Harbour and then through Sydney downtown, then out to the eastern suburbs. And the smell of the park, fresh smell of the park, Hyde Park also is in Sydney, and indeed just Manly Wharf at 7 o'clock in the morning, can't beat it really. Salt, bit of fuel smell from the ferry, just wonderful. So I miss that. And then what do I love about Spain? What I love about Spain is what absolutely confronted me when I went back to England, was how horrendous the traffic is in England now, not just London, but all over the place. Everywhere you go, there are roadworks, terrible delays. You just can't, enjoy driving anymore in England. And in Spain, you really love driving because the roads, by and large, are clear. They're beautiful roads, whether they be the freeways, whether they be country roads. And I've rediscovered the joy of driving a car on a road in Spain. That's the main thing. Obviously, the weather compared with anywhere else in Europe, waking up in the morning and just putting on a t-shirt and shorts, going for a walk with Dexter, 7 o'clock in the morning, can't beat that really. And we're lucky we live in a really nice place, lots of trees, very quiet, golf course area, and it's just beautiful here. Sunsets, the dawns, that's what I love. And so, yeah, thank you for that question. Now back to business, Peter, back to reality. Come on, another super chat. I'm going to try and do this right now. M.A. Khan. Don't know if it's come up. M.A. Khan. Hi, Peter. How does my favourite driver, Nigel Mansell, compare with Lewis? Like Russell, would he have the edge over one lap, or do you think Lewis is more complete? Did he have similar strengths and weaknesses? I don't actually want to think about Nigel Mansell, Lewis Hamilton driver combination, because I think they would have entangled themselves with one another on more than one occasion. Very, very similar, in my opinion. Very similar drivers. And talking about technique in the car and what they do with the car and their touch and their feel, Nigel, very, very similar to Lewis Hamilton. Would Lewis have been able to do what Nigel did with Nelson Piquet at Silverstone 87, that great pass into Stowe Corner? I wonder. That's a good question. I don't know. But I probably would. He's so good in traffic, Lewis. And would Nigel drive some of those amazing Lewis Hamilton races? Yes. He was good in the wet, he was good in the dry, and he used to be all over the shop in terms of maximizing what the car could do in any changing variable. Very similar drivers in the style of what they do. So Yeah. What was the second part of the question? You know, it's an amazing thing to think about, but it's yeah. I mean, they're all great drivers. Jim Clark against Lewis Hamilton in the same team. Very close. Very, very close. Sterling Moss against Lewis. Very close. Max Verstappen against Lewis. Very close. They're all these. I'm talking about the great, great, great racing drivers of all time. And you're putting them all together. Tazio Nuvolari and Lewis Hamilton in the same team. Yeah. Wow. I love thinking about things like that. Maybe we all do. This is from David B. What might Logan do next? Well, I don't know. It's a terrible thing, isn't it? It's especially before the US Grand Prix as well. I can't imagine why Williams have done that any more than Red Bull would replace Perez before the Mexican Grand Prix. So I guess they just, you know, the amount of money, they wanted more money because of the damage repairs or something. I don't know. I'm only putting 2 and 2 together, probably getting 5, but it's it's a bad thing. I'm surprised Formula One haven't done, they're in no position to stop something like that, but it's no bad thing for Formula One to go to the US Grand Prix in Austin, and Vegas for that matter, with an American driver, and they're not doing that now, and that's a great shame, I think. What can he do next where everybody else does, you know, IndyCar or sports cars, can't he? What else is there to do? Formula E? Yeah, it's basically the end, isn't it? Sadly. It's not in terms of being a racing driver and, you know, waking up in the morning and putting your kit together and enjoying driving a racing car on some circuit of the world. But in terms of what you really want to do, which is Formula One, it's very difficult for him to see him doing anything more now, sadly. And you know, to me, that's a bit of an indictment on the way he's been managed at Williams. Hi Peter, I just want to ask you who you think would take pole for the Grand Prix and who will win a Grand Prix if the car's performance were to be equal this Sunday. What, you mean all the Formula One cars are equal? Well, it's so hypothetical. It's difficult to answer that one, King D. You know, when you say cars' performance were to be equal, they're all in the same car, or suddenly magically they all had exactly the same amount of downforce at any given millisecond of every minute of every session, or what? I don't know how it would work, but you know, I think Max is super quick and probably right now the quickest driver in Formula One. And then you got all the usual suspects. Around Monza as well, I mean, it's not exactly the most difficult circuit in the world, is it? How many corners are there? There's the first chicane, let's call that 1 corner. Although Lewis makes it 2 really with that wonderful transition he does mid-corner there, and he always gets a brilliant exit out of, I guess it's turn 2, well anyway, the second part of the first chicane. The right-hander's then flat, and so that's 1 corner, 2 corner, 2 Lesmos, we'll give them 2, that's 4 corners. Then you got the Ascari chicane, that's 5, then the Parabolica, 6. 6 corners. Obviously there's more than that in terms of the turns they have and the engineering speak, but there's not a lot of corners, quite a lot of straight line motoring. And yes, of course, strategy and all the other things come into it, use of curbs, time management, top speed, all that stuff. It's not easy. But in terms of somebody going out on a quick lap and doing a good job in a good car, any number of drivers could currently do that. You know, you could see somebody like, you can see Daniel doing that in the Visa Cash thing. Yuki Tsunoda probably could put in a very quick lap. Alex Albon could put in a quick lap around Monza in the right circumstances. Obviously the 2 McLaren guys could. Obviously the 2 Ferrari guys, I mean, it goes on. I don't know. A better question, who would be, if they're all in the same car, who would be last? It'd probably be a better question. That's a difficult question to ask, to answer. I don't think it'd be K-Mag, and I don't think it'd be Nico. I don't know. Might be Guanyu maybe at the moment. He doesn't seem to be going very well, does he? Anyway, let's move on to SLD Kieran, who says, Christian, I think Horner said, I think Christian Horner, Mr. Horner, isn't it Mr. Horner these days? Sir Christian, isn't he a knight or something? I know, probably not. Christian Horner said the McLaren front wing looks different to other teams. Well, yeah, I think it does. Yep, and? None of them have identical front wings. Well, what's that all about? Does he mean there's more flex in it? Is that what he's saying? Flexi wings come back into it. The McLaren are going well. It must be something to do with flexi wings. Beautiful. Just got a new, this is what I love about Spain. If you want to know what I love about Spain, we just got a new thing here. Is where Jack does his golf. There's one of these dispenser things with the white handle and the blue handle, blue for cold water, and it's unbelievably cold water with one of those big bottle things on the top. So I was saying to Paul, by the way, where did that come from? He said, oh yeah, it's a great thing in Spain. You just do a monthly sub to the water bottles, which is really nice mineral water, and you get the free dispenser. I thought, yeah, right. That was probably 5 years ago when he did this deal, a special offer. Anyway, I go online, exactly that. So here we are, we've got a brand new free dispenser, and they deliver, I think it's 5 of these big things a month for €30, and beautiful mineral water, ice cold. Just wonderful. I can't imagine that happening in the UK, to be honest. Probably don't need the ice water there, do you, of course, but anyway. So there's another thing I like about Spain. So I've seen Cameron talking about some Newey talks with Alpine. Yeah, somebody else sent me actually a mate of mine who works for Audi sent me a thing today. Oh, I see the old... I'm not going to tell you who he is. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he actually phrased it quite well, I thought. Where are we? He said, I see Adrian's being courted by the tank top salesman. By which he means, I think, Flavio Briatore. So, well, if you were, and I'm not in any way saying this is happening, I'm just sort of putting 2 and 2 together and getting another 5. But I mean, if you are Flav and Bernie and you've been mates for a long time, the one bloke you'd want to wind up, wouldn't it be Lawrence Stroll? Wouldn't it be, all the bling, all the stuff? And so, if you really wanted to wind up Lawrence Stroll, wouldn't you start to initiate talks with Adrian Newey to be going to a team other than Aston Martin? I'm not saying that happened, but I can imagine it happening with a smile and a laugh. And so I can see Flav also. I mean, Flav's gone in there and he said, well, get rid of the Alpine, get rid of the Renault engine, do this, do that, get rid of him, hire that. He's got a pretty good team now, and well, it's a pretty good team. It's a different looking team, and it's fairly predictable what do you do. And then, being a logical guy, he would say, well, if Adrian's on the market, we've got to try and get Adrian Newey. It will transform everything. So why wouldn't he? All that means, if it's possible, if it is happening, it means they haven't actually signed the contract with Aston Martin. Would it happen? I don't know. I've kind of lost track of what Adrian may or may not do. I still think he should go and race Lotus 49s in classic events around the world, but that's just me, and that's what I would do if I was him. Eddie Moretti, another super chat. Hello, Eddie. For some reason I can't get the super chats to come up, but anyway, that's just typical of me. Peter, how do you watch a Grand Prix weekend? How many events do you attend when not there? How many screens do you watch and which feed and what data? Well, I'm lucky to be able to have access to quite a lot of the Formula One data and stuff. And so I do watch, I've got about 4 screens going on and quite a lot of data. Not as much as I would want, as the teams actually have, but I get quite a lot of it. So it's a question of how much data you have time to actually understand and condense into something that's meaningful and not be, overruled by data and try to keep a picture of what's happening. I'm doing the Singapore Grand Prix, probably doing Abu Dhabi, probably doing Austin actually. So I do about 7-8 races a year. Some of them out of choice, some of them because I'm working there. But I have to confess, I am kind of trying to limit the amount of, not travel I do in general, but travel to Grand Prix because, why? Because it's such a stress, all the traveling and the time and, all over the globe, and I just look at the faces of people who are doing every race and I just see them looking absolutely shattered and totally stressed by the whole thing. So, I don't go to as many races as perhaps I could. May sound incredibly pompous, but I just, to me, traveling is not as enjoyable as it used to be. And being at a race, actually, if I've got, say, a job to do on a Saturday, if I'm there on a Sunday, I can actually get more information sitting here in my studio than I can being at the race. So there's another argument actually for not being at that race. But the next race I'm doing is Singapore, as I say. So looking forward to that. So here we go. M.A. Khan. What do I think of Max criticising the media? He called their questions boring and repetitive. He prefers more challenging questions. Max seems to be a bit of a throwback, not robotic like others. Well, he's absolutely right, isn't he? Most of the questions are completely ludicrously boring and predictable and not worth responding to, really, I would say. You know, judging by the stuff I ever get to. It's not that I ever look at or read those press conferences they have anymore. I'm totally not into communal press conferences. All I can tell you is that I'm just going to get out of the picture again to try to get exposure right again. Yeah, a bit better, a little bit better. And when I talk to Max about normal things, he's very outward going and loves to talk about racing. But yeah, it would drive me mad. Well, I think it would drive all of us mad. All of us would be driven mad by the incessantly boring questions that are asked out there, and nothing of, it's so predictable, isn't it? 2 questions about something to do with the race, and then the third question, what about the championship, what about the next race, and all that rubbish. And then when it is about the race, it's always stuff that doesn't really add up to anything anyway. So give up on that too, and just talk on WhatsApp. That's the way to do it. A couple of days after the race, a few WhatsApp messages, much more revealing with your mates. Peter, one area Piastri needs to improve consistently to challenge Norris. Hasn't come up. It's a good question, isn't it? Because I keep going on about the one area that Norris needs to look at, which is shorter corners. Norris, yeah, I mean, that's what he needs to do. But Piastri, I'm a bit confused, actually, to be honest. I think think about his driving. I mean, I think he's still capable of being a bit too spiky when he's under pressure on a qualifying lap. And I think one of the reasons we do see him sometimes struggling with tyre management in the race is because, without seeing it on TV, he's been a bit spiky and he's gone over a curb and he's damaged the floor a little bit and he's lost a bit of downforce, and that immediately then kills your tyre management. And I think that happens quite a lot with Oscar. It happens more often than it does with Lando. And I haven't got the data here in front of me, but I think he changed an underfloor on the Saturday night, actually, at Zandvoort, which suggests that he did that in qualifying, Q2, I think. Max did too, as a matter of interest. But he's still on the front row. And I think that's the area where Oscar, I think he's definitely a great learner. And I think he would have learned a lot following Charles Leclerc around Zandvoort, as he learned a lot following him around Monaco. And he would have his eyes open about that, and he would have been watching the way Charles did that, and that would have been a really big race for Oscar, I think, what he was doing there in P4. But in terms of it's probably footwork more than handwork, I think, with Oscar. It seems to be more throttle than hands, and I think he's a bit spiky in that area, and Lando probably less so. Well, Lando not, for sure, because we know how smooth and svelte he is. So if there's one area where Oscar would need, I wouldn't say it's the only area, but an area where he could probably focus with decent result now would be footwork. And I haven't seen enough of the data, and it would be ludicrous for me to say throttle more than brakes. But generally speaking, when a driver is a little bit spiky with throttle application, it usually manifests itself also on the brake pedal and how you release the brake pedal pressure. And all of those things are critical with what he wants to do as a driver, and he has the talent to be able to put all that together for sure. And I think at the moment he's focusing a lot on braking into the corner in a way that Charles Leclerc does. But what he can't see is what Charles is doing with his right foot. And Charles is really good with throttle as well, really good. So I'd say it was that. Nobody seems to be talking about the fact that Sergio Perez did a session with a coach before the Dutch Grand Prix. Wonder what YouTube channel they had been watching in order to bring that one about. Yeah, I won't say any more than that. Hi Peter, which team do you think will be the team to beat this weekend? Isaac Slabbert. The team to beat is McLaren. Whether McLaren are I think if you beat McLaren, you got a pretty good chance of winning the Italian Grand Prix. I'm going to cop out by that way, and saying if Red Bull beat McLaren, they should win the Italian Grand Prix. And I think all I can say is I think it'll be a bit closer in terms of the race. It'll be a one-stop strategy, I'm sure, but over the length of the two stints, I don't think the Red Bull's tyre management will be as relatively bad as it was at Zandvoort relative to the McLaren, and I think the Red Bull will be nearer the McLaren. I can't see the McLaren being slow at all, and I can see it being on the front row, one of them being on the front row, but I think Red Bull will have a better race than they had at Zandvoort. It's really sticking my neck out, isn't it? I guess everyone wants to know where Mercedes and Ferrari will be. As I say, it's as we're going to a sort of low downforce for the first time, it's kind of difficult to know exactly how they're all going to go. I don't think engines are going to come into it, which normally you could have said in the old days. And Mercedes probably won't have as much trouble with this sort of knife-edgy sweet spot that they've got. They'll probably have a bit of a bigger sweet spot. Softer tyres won't hurt them either, I don't think. And same with Ferrari. But I suppose you could argue that Ferrari not having the same downforce as Mercedes, Red Bull and McLaren for the same top speed, if you like, they don't generate as much downforce with that car. On a low downforce circuit, maybe Ferrari's disadvantage is less. If you think about it, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't. iQuantum. Hi Peter. What is your opinion on Williams' trajectory over the next several years? Do you think they'll genuinely improve? Well, they're still at a fairly low point, so I can't imagine they won't improve in 25 from where they are today, because for one thing the regulations are running out of steam at the end of 25, and there's a limit to what you can do to a car to get it to be competitive, and so Williams should be there or thereabouts in 25. How much depth they have in order to build a great car for 26 is, obviously they don't have to worry about the powertrain because that'll all be Mercedes, but how good a job they'll do with that car, I really don't know. And I'm a bit confused by the whole approach of Williams, because on the one hand they often seem to be in massive financial trouble, i.e. we couldn't bring a spare car to the Australian Grand Prix, and yet on the other side here they are bankrolling Franco Colapinto into Formula One. Great thing, for which they should be massively praised. So it seems to be just a difficult team to understand. Doesn't seem to bear any relationship at all to the Williams that I knew, and there's nothing there that even remotely reeks of the history that Williams has. It's like a completely different team run effectively by this bank, and I assume their long-term goal is to sell the whole thing at a profit. Isn't that what financial institutions try to do with any commodity they buy? So we all have to bear that in mind as well. This is all about enriching the Williams brand and selling it on, I guess. So do I think they'll genuinely improve? Difficult to imagine they won't genuinely improve next year with Carlos Sainz in the other car. Alex Albon is really good, and they've got good facilities. I presume they've got a full budget within the budget cap. So there's no reason why they shouldn't have a really good car and maybe get a few podium finishes next year. So that is a genuine improvement. As I say, the question mark is 26 and how good their depth of technology will be in beating the Ferraris, Red Bulls, Mercedes of this world, and McLaren's obviously as well. Difficult to see them beating those four. But they could well be the next best team after that, I think. Should Williams have picked Mick Schumacher over Colapinto? This is from Hanny Pham. I like that Williams are giving opportunities to the juniors, but wouldn't it be better to bring someone with experience? What would they gain by running Mick? Because this is only a short-term thing anyway. It's only the second half of this year, or the last third of this year almost. And they know kind of what Mick's doing. They know Mercedes would like to see him in the car. So that was the main reason, just to sort of keep in with Mercedes, their partner with the engine supply, and have Mick. But as a driver, maybe not really doing anything for the Williams future. I would suspect somebody at Williams in the driver management side really rates Franco Colapinto and thinks that he's, at the next, dare I say it, the next great Kimi, not Kimi Räikkönen, but the other Kimi, and that they've got him there and he's really good and let's give him a chance. And when, when the time is right, we'll put him in the car. Or we could maybe sell him if he goes really well. That might be another thing they're thinking. Dexter. Oh, sorry. He wants to go out. There's nobody else here at the moment. I'm loath to just let him out, though, I think. Come on. Won't be too long. Won't be too long. Here's a good reason for me not to keep this going for another 20 minutes. All right, Dex? Won't be, look. What's Dex saying? Another 20 minutes? Yeah? Another 20 minutes? All right? Ah. I feel as if he wants to go out. So you see how devoted I am to the live stream. Dexter, wait. That cushion, by the way, in the background, my mum did the tapestry for it, who's now 102. She didn't do it when she was 102, but yeah. I saw her in England. She's brilliant, going really well. Very annoyed that Alexander Zverev isn't winning more tennis matches. That's the main thing going through her mind. I met Alexander Zverev at Monaco one year. He's a good bloke. Cool guy. Anyway, I respect them running Colapinto. I think that's good. I like to see young guys being given a chance. And I think Colapinto, he doesn't got any money. And there he is, giving this Formula One chance. What a great story. I love it. And Mick, I rate Mick, but I'd like to see Mick being given a proper chance, I think is what I was going to say. I'd love to have seen Mick in the... I don't know, he's a guy that Alpine could have hired, isn't he? I know they got Jack Doohan, who's really good. Jetcraft, thank you. He's wonderful, very talented driver. But there's a place he could have gone to, and he's good. He's very good. The big question mark is why Mercedes aren't running Mick with Lewis Hamilton leaving. Is the great Kimi going to be that much greater than Mick Schumacher would be in that car? I think Mick next year in a Mercedes would actually do a very good job, is basically what I'm saying. And I'd love to have seen him in that car. I say loved, past participle, because it looks as if he's not going to be in that car next year. But the bottom line for Mercedes is that if you believe in Mick that much, race him. M.A. Khan. Oh, you've done that one. Okay. It's about Mansell and Lewis. Stridar. Peter, is this the end of Red Bull dominance in the ground effect era, and will it help Max make a decision to move to Merc? Well, as I said before, I can't imagine Max would be thinking beyond anything before 26. And that's a long, long way. And then nobody knows what 26 is going to be like. Maybe I'm just going to get out of the picture again, try and get this blasted exposure right. Still wrong, still too bright. It's nothing to do with the lighting, it's just... Maybe if I put my hand in front, it'll help. Yeah, it has helped a bit, not much. It could be that Sauber have an unbelievable car in 26 and win 5 Grand Prix. Unlikely, but possible. So, even Max needs to sit and wait and see what happens in 26 before he makes a decision. Why would he make a decision now about what team to race for in 26 when Red Bull could have by far and away the best car on the grid? Why would he do that? A team that he knows and loves. Just wouldn't do it. So whatever team, he's in a very strong position, being, you know, the driver he is and the world champion that he is, multi-world champion. So if whatever team is, let's say Red Bull do have a terrible car in 26, whatever team has a great car in 26, it's half a chance Max is going to be able to get into that car for 27, isn't he? Whatever it is, whether it's a Ferrari or whatever. If it's Max Verstappen, a lot of teams would move mountains to have Max Verstappen. So he's in a strong position to go wherever he wants, whenever he wants. But I don't think he will leave Red Bull until he knows what their 26 car's like, because it might be brilliant. Simple as that. That's the logical thing. Of course, nothing in racing is very logical these days, is it? Zishan Asfar. Peter, any truth in Danny Ricciardo to Audi for 25? Well, I haven't heard that. Who have they got? They got Nico Hulkenberg, haven't they? And they've got Mattia Binotto and running it. And anyway, it's not Audi in 25 because it's still Sauber. It's only Audi in 26. And I think, aren't Sauber still running Bottas and Zhou? I think they are in 25. I think, maybe not. So anyway, 26, I doubt it. I doubt Audi would be thinking 26, let's sign Daniel Ricciardo, because it's at the back end of his career now, isn't he? I doubt they'd be doing that, but you know, anything's possible, I suppose. Emilio Klassen. Hi, Peter. Recently watched your interviews of Rob Wilson. Mind doing an update if possible? Yeah, Rob's still doing what he does. You know, that's the great thing about Rob. He's always learning, like all good people, all racing drivers who are constantly self-critical. Rob is self-critical and constantly learning. Just chatting to him the other day, he's excited about things that he's just little details he's picked up with his work, with the cars, how he drives the laps, and the effect of the rates of input, which is what his forte is. And he's doing well. You know, Cam Waters, as I say, very good Aussie V8 driver, has done a lot of stuff with Rob. Look at Linus Lundqvist, another great Rob Wilson driver, doing very well in IndyCar. And a driver who's remained nameless, who recently did a day with Rob as a result of things we've been saying on this channel. So good for him, that driver. I only say that because when Rob told me about it, he said, don't tell anybody. It seems quite a lot of people know, but anyway, I'm respecting Rob's request. So Rob, yeah, good, really good. And he doesn't change things very much. It's still road cars. It's still an old stopwatch. It's cones defining a lap. It's not wearing helmets or overalls. It's being able to talk. And it's Rob doing a lap between cones and sometimes on natural corners. And usually being quicker than the driver he's with, if not a couple of tenths slower. And then the driver, after half a day, going a little bit quicker, and then Rob going out and going a second quicker, and then the other driver getting in and doing the rest of the day and then ending up 3 or 4 tenths quicker, that sort of thing. He's still very quick, in other words, and still very able to look at initial steering input, initial brake pedal pressure, initial throttle input, and the opposite of those, the coming out of the brake pedal pressure, coming out of the throttle, and releasing the steering. All of those things, he's absolutely the best in the planet Earth, for sure. And woe betide any driver who doesn't spend the time to think about that and spend time with Rob, learning, polishing their craft. Some drivers don't need to. You know, I really don't think a Lewis or a Max, possibly even a Charles, can really benefit much from what Rob does because they're doing it already. But most of the others could. And most of them have an ego that says, what could I possibly learn from Rob Wilson? I'm going to talk to my engineer tomorrow and go to the sim and do all the things and repeat all the errors they've been making. Lee Kambanga. Hi, Peter. How come my messages are not being read, yet I'm the first person to send one? Haha, I guess I'm an unlucky for weeks now. Well, you're not first in this list, but here I am reading your letter, your question, Lee. Thank you very much for asking it. Not actually a question. Well, I can't answer the other bit. If you really did post it first and it didn't appear first, that's a question for the gurus at Google, isn't it? Zishin Zafar says, thoughts on Sergio Perez doing sessions with Rob Wilson over the summer break? Well, it looks as if the truth is out now. Well, yeah, I think it was only one session, but he'd probably do more. And that is I'm pretty sure it is because what we've been saying. I mean, Cameron, I think, asked me, or somebody did, that's on this channel, on the live stream. I think, if what one thing Horner should be telling, Christian Horner should be saying to Sergio over the August break. And I said, well, book some time with Rob Wilson because he's definitely too edgy going into the corner. And he's great apex to exit, or transition point to exit, but he needs to really get on top of what's happening at the early stage of the corner. And that's exactly what I imagine they were working on throughout and what Rob would have noticed straight away. So there we go. Kevin Pryor, this is another super chat, which I guess is again not going to come out because they're the coloured ones. Everybody says, it's very easy to see the super chats. Well, for me, that has come out. There you go. Hello, Peter. Why is Hamilton not so good in qualifying these days? Well, give him a chance. He has had his moments in qualifying, and I did say before Zandvoort that it's not a circuit where a guy like Lewis or Max or Charles, the three best short corner drivers in the business at the moment, Zandvoort's not a circuit where there's much for them to do differently to everybody else. There aren't any corners really that lend itself to that sort of polish. And whereas Max nonetheless also has in his armory this ability to just get the best from the car when there's crosswind and it's not that well balanced, but he's under pressure and he's got to get the lap in and he's right on the edge of that delicate moment, he still does it. As I've said from Abu Dhabi 21 onwards, in that moment when it's not about creating a short corner, it's just about balancing the car on the absolute edge and getting 100% from it. I said then, after 7 World Championships and racing in Formula One competitively since 2007, I found it impossible to believe that Lewis was going to be as quick as George in those sorts of conditions. I think he's still quicker than George when he's got corners that he can play with and when he's got good feel for the car and a nice sweet spot and good feel for the front, good feel for the rear. But when the car's on an absolute knife edge and you don't know if you got the right temperature or not, you're not able to do any short corner driving, and when things are confused by crosswind, how on earth could anybody expect Lewis Hamilton to be as quick as George Russell? George is a young, ultra-fast racing driver. Lewis is a 7 times world champion. So in that precise area, there's no way, in my opinion, Lewis was ever going to beat George. A lot of areas where he is quite still capable of beating George, but in that situation, and that was absolutely what we had, the perfect storm at Zandvoort in qualifying, he was not going to do it. So that's what happened. Monza differently, because turn 1, 2, or say turn 1, 1B, whatever you want to call it at Monza, that is a really nice bit of road for Lewis Hamilton. I'd say the 2 Lesmos are really good bits of road for Lewis Hamilton as well, and the Parabolica too. So he's got quite a lot to play with there at Monza within his own scope of what he does really well in a race car. So let's see how it goes. The problem with that in qualifying is it might all get beaten by who's the guy that gets the toe, and if George gets a mega toe and Lewis doesn't, then George is obviously going to be quicker. The advantages of a toe are going to be greater than all the little details that Lewis is going to be able to do on those corners. But I'm just saying that at Monza there's more scope to do, paradoxically in a way actually, bearing in mind Zandvoort's all corners, if you look at the map, there's a lot more you can do with the car, Lewis can do with the car at Monza. Coming out of the Ascari chicane too, keeping it on the right for as long as possible before moving back for the Parabolica. Those little details Lewis has always been very, very good at. Fernando too. Fernando's very good in those details, particularly Monza. And he should be right up there too, I think, at Monza, putting aside the benefits or not of toes. So I'm just going back to another super chat to see whether I've managed to answer that question or not. Oh, no, there wasn't. This is Andre Mogasan. Sorry, Andre Mogasan. Any chance, this is a super chat, any chance to implement a pit lane time restriction in order to prevent queues from forming? For example, once a driver reaches the pit exit, he cannot spend more than 10 seconds before he gets on track. It would improve qualies, maybe. If they're doing a standing start practice, they move over, don't they? So the queues are only when they're waiting for the pit lane to open. They're not usually for any other reason. If somebody's doing a start, and if they're all going out together, obviously they're accused, but they all go out in order to try to get out as quickly as possible, and they stand there waiting for sit there waiting for the lights to go green. So there's no way of avoiding that other than not to go out so early. And if you're doing a start, you move to the right anyway. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, Monza, you make a good point there, reminding us of how bad it is at Monza in terms of the backing up going into the parabolica in qualifying, particularly Formula 2, Formula 3, but also Q1 at Monza. Everyone will be slowing down before the parabolica, trying to get a run, and the traffic will be horrendous. You know, if you go out early, you could find 6 or 7 cars doing 3 miles an hour into the parabolica. I'm saying that as an exaggeration because now they have deltas and that's not going to be as dangerous as it used to be, but that will still ruin your lap, whatever happens. So, yeah. Good point. Thank you for mentioning that. So going back to another one. BNNT question. Am I right in thinking McLaren has found significant pace and not Red Bull going slower, or in relation to the first race of the year? McLaren definitely found significant pace in relation to the first race of the year. Red Bull, I think, have lost a little bit, and I think it's because they were running that, as I've said on Twitter and a few other comments, I think they have been running a legal inertia generated T-valve for the brakes to give them a little bit of assistance in terms of brake steer going into a corner. Very clever thing if they were doing that. I'm prepared to be overruled if I'm shown that isn't the case, but it looks as if they had that on the car until China, took it off after China because the FIA might have said, we're not sure about this, we think you should take it off, and then the rules around that have all been clarified in the August break, and ever since China they haven't had a car that's as easy to dial in and to have with dialing around a good front end. If you've got a good front end, you can dial a car as good as a Red Bull around that front end, but they haven't consistently had that good enough front end to do that ever since China. So I'd say Red Bull have gone back a little bit, and McLaren have improved definitely in terms of the size of their sweet spot, the cure of bouncing relative to ride height, the grip they're getting for the top speed they have. They've done an excellent job in that area. All part of their new wind tunnel as well, which is now fully operating. It's not in the technical center, it's down the road, but it's a really good tunnel, quite obviously, and they're getting great correlation on that. Ritesh Nalla. Hi Peter. I just graduated from Oxford Brookes in MSc Motorsports Engineering. In my free time I write blogs on Formula 1 data analysis using generated graphs. Would you be kind enough to have... I don't see the rest of the question there actually, Ritesh. Sorry, I need to bring it up so everyone can see the problem I'm having trying to... Yeah, here we go. Just says enough, kind of... anyway, I'd love to see some of your graphics, and I'd love to put some of them together. I'd like to put all the acceleration of Lando versus Max in graphic form for the video I did on Sunday night, but that would mean transposing numbers into very nice colored graphs in the space of about 3.5 minutes. So it probably will never happen, because I do put these videos out, and apologies if errors do creep in periodically, because I put them out as quickly as I possibly can, and sometimes, you know, we just have to grin and bear it, because unlike a lot of YouTube videos that are out there, sometimes they take, you know, a couple of weeks to put them together and they're really nicely done. Hats off to all those people who do those. In my case, obviously I'm doing stuff that's pretty current, so I need to get it out as quickly as possible. Brooke McLaughlin. Hello Peter. Hello Brooke. I like questions like that. Very good one. Doesn't stretch my brain too much. Probably usually followed by something a little bit further down the road. It's not actually coming up either. Sorry about that, Brooke. Hey, it's come up now, I think. Another super chat maybe, or not? Oh yeah, I've had that one. Sorry. Okay, going back. Okay, Teza kind of reinforcing what I just said. Sorry, I'm just playing around with it. Red Bull are a third of a second slower relative to where they were. Interesting. I'm going to have to, before I do this next one, so I don't look like a complete idiot, I'm going to have to look something up. 1 second. Just chat amongst yourselves. I'll be with you in 2 seconds. Who is it? So the question is, thoughts on Freddie Slater? And the reason I had to look that up because I've never heard of him. So that probably tells you enough about my knowledge. Apparently he's an actor in a soap called EastEnders, which I've never watched a single episode of in my life. Sorry about that. So what do you watch on TV then, Peter? YouTube's great now. They got a thing. You just go to classic movies, and there's some great movies, old Bogart movies. Somebody said the other day, I was listening to a podcast, and they said, "Oh, it's like somebody saying black and white movies are still worth watching." It's got to be, nobody watches black and white movies. That's my American accent. I thought, well, I watch black and white movies. I love them. Anyway, that's just me. Again, that's just me. Kevin Pryor. Oh, yeah, he's saying going around Suzuka in a sim is very dramatic, especially the S's. Yeah, well, that's the key to the S's. The famous chicane at Suzuka, Prost v Senna from '89 always comes to mind. Yeah. Well, what comes to mind for me also is Giancarlo Fisichella blowing his big chance at Ferrari by braking too early into the chicane as well, and he lost everything he'd gained on that lap and didn't qualify well, and that was the end of his Ferrari career, sadly. But yeah, that ridiculous thing, Prost, Senna, and not only there, plenty of others. And also, some big shunts coming out of the chicane through that downhill right-hander, negative camber. Timo Glock memorably had a big shunt there, didn't he, in the Toyota, I think, coming out of that right-hander, down the hill by the pits. Bit embarrassing, really, for anyone to go off on that bit of road just before the pits. So, M.A. Khan here. Again, I'm having difficulty getting these questions up. I know this is boring for you guys, but I'm like you guys. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm very annoyed when things don't... There we go. Peter, M.A. Khan. I think that's come up. Let me just check finally. Yep, it is. I now understand why you talk about a driver's environment in relation to their development. Leclerc has the same talent as Max and Lewis. He just seems less refined. Will he fulfill his potential? Well, he will fulfill his potential if he has a very good racing car. I mean, it's a platitude, isn't it, to say that? But that's an obvious point. So that's the first thing. If he doesn't have a very, very good racing car, can he still fulfill his potential? Well, yes, he can, with the proviso that he's now been in this rather unstable environment for quite a long time. And being a driver who's quite emotional anyway, it's about the worst environment in which to be, the Ferrari environment, if you're an emotional driver. So if he was to do a deal tomorrow with Toto Wolff and join Mercedes for 2025, 10-year contract, living in the Mercedes world, the English way of doing things, the UK way of doing things, even with George Russell, I think you would get the best from him. But I think it would need to be a long-term commitment thing. It wouldn't be just get Charles, plug him in, expect him to win races, because he needs to get absolutely into the mindset of a race team which is very focused and very organised, as Mercedes are, generally speaking. And so he could, yeah, for sure he can do it. And Max has been in that environment from day one, which is one of the reasons he's a very, very good racing driver now. And Lewis has basically been in that environment all his life as well. So Charles is a little bit different. And to get that out of your system isn't an easy thing. But he could do it. If he's going to do it at Ferrari need to give him an unbelievably good car. And so how would he go against Lewis, I guess, is the next question. And he will do very well against Lewis. And there's some of Lewis's calm approach and sort of basic simplicity of driving the racing car and just getting on with it that will rub off on Charles, I think, because Ferrari is so frenetic about everything. Even now, even with Fred there keeping things nice and calm, it's still relatively frenetic. And I think that'll have a beneficial effect on Charles. So now Michael Osorguini says, do you think Charles should try to leave Ferrari to win a world championship? If so, what teams do you think it would sign him? No, I think at the moment, if you're Charles Leclerc, you just think 25, even Ferrari might be able to do what McLaren are doing, because the regulations aren't changing. We just make the car a little bit better every race if we can, and we should be there for 25. That's what he should be thinking if he isn't. And then, like everybody else, he should be thinking, and who knows, in 26 we might have the greatest racing car on the planet. Who knows? Nobody knows. So it'd be crazy for him to think, I've got to leave Ferrari to win a championship. Even if he is thinking that, I would tell him not to think that, because there's half a chance the Ferrari will be good next year, and half a chance it'll be reasonable in 26, or terrible, or very good. You know, nobody knows for 26. So Kevin Pryor says, do you think, Peter, it could be very close between Red Bull, McLaren and Mercedes at Monza? Yeah, I do. I think, and I would add Ferrari to that, the more I think about it, on a low downforce circuit. I don't think Ferrari's lack of downforce this year will be such an disadvantage as it is on circuits like, say, Silverstone or Zandvoort. So I think Ferrari could be a little bit nearer the front, but it will be close. You know, yeah, I think it will be. Slap hands. Who had the better car, Red Bull or Ferrari? When you say had, where are we talking about? At Zandvoort, you mean? Maybe at the last race? I'd say Red Bull, and because they beat them and they were quicker. So, but when you say had, maybe you're referring to another year or something. I don't know. Kevin Price says, too many crashes though with Maldonado. Yeah, absolutely right. But he's not the only driver that's crashed cars, and I don't think he was, if I may say so, I don't think he was very well managed by Williams that year either. I don't think there was much understanding of the way Pastor's life was and what would bring the best out of him, and not let the blood rush to his head when things didn't go exactly right. And I don't think it was enough. It was just sort of taken for granted that if the car was good, he would be good. And that's not the way it is with most drivers, let alone a guy like Pastor. So I think I blame Williams a bit for that as well. And there I am criticising the current Williams for the way they've probably not managed Logan Sargent very well. I would say Williams then. I don't think they managed Pastor's season very well after that Spanish Grand Prix win. Central 99, Peter, thoughts on Colapinto as a driver? Yeah, no, I think he's very good. I can't say yet what sort of driver he is, but the evidence and what I've seen of him is that he's very, very soft inputs, very, very nice to watch as a racing driver, very consistent, very good attitude too. So I've got a lot of time for Colapinto and a lot of respect for Williams. I mean, just said what I said about Logan and Pastor. I've got a lot of respect for Williams that they're running him. I think it's a good thing. So there we go. So just trying to get back to some... We haven't got too much longer to go, actually. Dexter's reminding me. So I'm going to have to just do a few more questions. This is another super chat. Hi, Peter. Thank you for your analysis vids. I enjoy watching. And my question, what is the difference between shortening a corner and V'ing a corner? Well, V'ing a corner is braking to a certain point on the outside of the corner, if you like, in a V, and then slow mid-corner rotation and basically a straight line exit. And that requires, obviously, a lot of grip at the rotation point. And it does require a lot of manipulation and feel for the brake pedal pressure, release of the brake pedal pressure against load of steering. And if you don't have that, but you do have an incredibly powerful back end on the car with a lot of downforce, you can get away with it. You can get the back end to work, and you can get away with it. And without decrying Seb Vettel's ability, which is immense, but without decrying it, that is what Seb did at Red Bull for a good 5 years. He was really brilliant at that, and it paid off in spades, as we were talking about earlier in the video, for example, in how quick he was around Suzuka. A short corner is a driver with the ability to create short corners is a driver that has that feel. All those other tools that I don't think Seb has to the extent of a Max or a Charles or a Lewis. All those other tools that enable him to rotate the car mid-corner. Say mid-corner. To rotate the car at exactly the appropriate moment, which is the feel. This is the difference, really. The feel for the moment of least possible downside of rotating the car, which is an annoying, time-consuming thing to do, because corners are only there to join straights. So you want to be on the straight for as long as possible going in, and you want to be on the straight for as long as possible going out. But you've got to somehow get around this corner. So you try to increase the length of the straight going in by turning into the corner as gradually as you can, as early, therefore, as you probably can, and then you get the car stopped to a rotation point that is exactly the right speed and exactly the right moment to do that rotation, exactly the right moment. And then you're left with a straight exit. And that feel for that moment is what is the precious quality of a driver like Max Verstappen. It's not something he can describe in words, I suspect. It's something he just innately feels and has probably innately felt all his life. And it's different every corner, every lap. Whereas a V driver typically brakes at the same place and basically rotates at the same place in a fairly mechanical, geometric sort of way. But a short corner driver, everything is changing all the time, every lap. And he's feeling the car, balancing the car, all the dynamic weights in the car. So that's what it is. That's the difference between Lewis when he doesn't have quite enough grip to do what he wants, but he still gets away with it, and Vettel when he doesn't have the grip and can't get away with it. That's the difference. And a lot of drivers then don't use the V corner principle because probably, and it's true, probably a quicker way to drive is to brake more in a straight line, turn into the corner a little bit later and just get on the power as smoothly and as well as you possibly can in a perfect balance. As Sergio Perez tries to do, as Ayrton Senna did to absolute perfection compared with Alain Prost, as Nelson Piquet did, as Carlos Sainz does. So those drivers are quicker than a V driver who doesn't have a great racing car, and they can do more with an average car. But a good short corner driver will always beat both of them if there are corners on the circuit where you can do it. As I say, Zandvoort, a lot of those bank corners don't lend themselves to short corner drivers, and nor do wide corners where a lot of drivers can sort of, just kind of go in, run a bit wide and then come back in again, like turn one at Zandvoort or the hairpin at Suzuka. So yeah, that's the difference. It's creating a short corner on a corner like Copse is what it's all about, actually, in my opinion. And there are not many drivers who can do that. And you can see what Max does with the car compared with Perez as they're coming towards you into Copse. And you can see the seamless transition, first of all, of Max when he's going from traveling in a straight line to starting to turn in. And it's just like absolutely seamless. And it's quite early. It appears quite early in the camera lens. And then you see Perez, and it's just a slight nudge as he loads the steering up, and it's slightly later, and then the big conundrum to all of this is Fernando Alonso. A lot of people give me a hard time for not talking more about Fernando, and Fernando always has a moment when it's going, you can tell he's in a straight line and bong, now he's got load on the car, and that always unsettles the car slightly, and that's what he loves. That is Fernando's territory, and then he's just beautiful to watch after that. And sometimes he's doing that really early into the corner and he's shortening the corner. Other times he's not. It's kind of difficult to understand how he drives, really. A little bit like trying to understand how Fernando lives with that sort of jolt he gives the steering is a bit like trying to understand why Ayrton always blipped the throttle mid-corner until he found the perfect moment. Both of them come under the heading in my book of slight imperfections. Ayrton Senna, imperfect? Well, yeah, he was. His throttle application was not perfect. Everything else was, but his throttle application wasn't. It's good to know, isn't it? He was human after all. So anyway, there you go. I've nearly finished, I think, haven't we? We're going to get an early mark tonight. Shall I scroll down to the bottom, annoy lots of people, and go into some of the... So, Jay, this is one of the last questions that come through at the moment. The RB19 was dominant, but was it because it was quick itself or more other teams making a mess? McLaren 38, W11 seemed like actual rocket shoots, while the RB19 never seemed a rocket to that extent. Yeah, I think the 19 was... It's a funny time we're in Formula One. Don't forget that. I mean, this regulation we're in started in 2022, a year late because of COVID. And only one team got it right for 2.5 years, throughout 22, throughout 23, and for half of 24, and that's Red Bull. And they, I think simplistically, you could say they reached a ceiling because the regulations are going to remain completely unchanged through to the end of 2025, and then we go to completely new regs for 26. And so that's a very unusual situation in Formula One, because in most eras of any rules, there's always been significant changes, usually been significant changes to wing sizes, ride heights, all sorts of things going on within the basic fabric of a regulation, a 3-litre engine regulation or whatever it might be. And that isn't happening here. So it's like there's that perfection there on the wall to be reached. And McLaren are nearer that perfection than any other team at the moment. Red Bull sort of created a wall which they were sitting on, the other teams couldn't get near for 2.5 years. Now that wall has moved back a bit. McLaren have changed the rules a bit, and now Red Bull are going to try and get there. And on that basis, you've got to assume some of the other teams will get nearer. So Red Bull's advantage with the 19 was not so much that it was an unbelievable racing car. It was just that everybody else was pathetic. And they just were nowhere after a 12 months of this regulation. They still didn't know how to get over the bouncing, and they couldn't get ride height for straight line speed, and they just weren't getting it together. Whereas Red Bull kind of got it right from day one, and we're just developing the car in a logical way. So that's where we're at. I think we'll see. I think we will see. As I say, we'll see. Even Williams should have a reasonable car next year, because there is, dare I say it, a limit to how much you basically can know about these regulations and how to make the cars work. That's what you'd assume to be the case. And I think it is the case. So was that. Dexter's come back again. How much you Dex? So last one is going to be Ahmed Jada. Hi Peter, hope you're well. Look forward to your videos and insight as always. I've been watching old races. Do you have any thoughts on Keke Rosberg and Elio De Angelis? Thanks. Dex, any thoughts on... Well, I've got to see the camera before I start moving the camera. What am I doing? Get alive. Here we go. Back to this one. There we go. Dex, sorry. Any thoughts on Keke Rosberg, Dex? There we go. Or, there we go. Aurelio De Angelis. He doesn't seem to be that concerned, does he? The expression on Dexter's face suggests that he has very fond memories of both, as I do. Keke, Mr. Gold Tank Cartier watch, Mr. Yellow overalls, ICI fibers, MCM luggage. He was the business. Massive oversteer driver. Unbelievable car control, very good at stamping out a cigarette, flattening the cigarette underfoot, climbing into the car and doing a 160-mile-an-hour lap of Silverstone. Very good. That was Keke Rosberg. I did a lap with him once at Donington in the wet in a Ford Granada, and he was doing one of these things of opposite lock, just twirling the wheel one way. We were sort of 90 degrees to the apex, and then it was one of these for the next corner, just twirling the wheel. So yeah, Keke, great. And Elio, yeah, he wasn't so much to stamp out the cigarette. He was more the sort of, just flick the cigarette and a bit of ash comes down and okay, and then he'd put it out in a nice way, and then he'd get in the car. And then he'd take his pods out, because he's one of the first guys with the Sony Walkman who'd listen to Al Jarreau or something cool like that. I discovered Al Jarreau through Elio De Angelis, actually. He's Australian kangaroo. It was an Italian racewear company. Tennis, actually. Australian wear tennis clothing company, but kangaroo, but Italian. And it was very fitting that Elio was with them. Very cool company. And what a lovely guy he was. Piano, very good piano player. And yeah, beautiful driver. I would say Nelson Piquet mold, quite long corners, very smooth touch, lovely, very smooth, soft touch. Very similar to Nelson, I'd say, in speed and the way he drove. Not as quick as Nigel, got to say, but he and Eddie Cheever pretty much on a par. Eddie maybe slightly quicker, maybe, but very close. But Elio was above all a class act, just a lovely guy, always civil, always polite, well-mannered, and no matter what he was wearing and how quickly he got dressed, he always looked absolutely perfect. He could make faded jeans and a white t-shirt. He didn't need to wear any more. Just fabulous guy. Yeah, I really miss him. Went to his funeral in that huge cathedral in Rome. One of the saddest days of my life. And then I went to the Foro Italica, where the Italian Open was about to begin, I think, from memory. And it was empty at that stage. I just sat in the tennis arena there with the red clay. Just thinking of Elio. Anyway, yeah, bit of a sad ending to the stream, but thank you very much to everybody for your audio questions. Apologies for those I didn't get through to. Dexter's jumping up and down. Got to get going. And but we'll be back this weekend, obviously, with the 3 videos from the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Gran Premio de Monza. And looking forward to that very much. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, and of course to you, the viewers, for supporting this channel. Brilliant to have you. Brilliant to do this live stream. See you again soon. There we go.